Welcome to Conversations for the Good. Good morning, Dr. Jane.
Good morning, Anna. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. So, we're still in the uncertainty of the pandemic with all of its many demands and constraints. Everyone that I have talked to is openly admitting to experiencing an overwhelming amount of stress. We spoke last time of befriending the stress, struggles, and discomfort. And I can't help but wonder what will it take for us to get to that other side of this crisis with our mental, emotional, and physical health intact?
Well, Anna, that's a good question. And the short answer is resilience. And resilience has everything to do with how we adapt. From negative changes or life challenges. Are we responding? Are we reacting? Um, what are the demands? What are the restraints? And how are we interpreting those? Are we sinking or rebounding? For most of us, this isn't the first difficult situation we've been through in our lives. Most of us have faced everything from minor screw ups to full blown failures to traumatic stress and trauma. And we've survived and we've rebounded.
Dr. Jane, so how do we access resilience and where does it come from?
Well, as we've discussed in previous episodes, the primitive brain and its surveillance system is always looking for the threat. It's always looking for the danger. And this activates that survival response, puts us in that fight or flight, as we've talked before. And this really kind of mobilizes us to protect ourselves. And so this part of the brain, if it's continuously activated, like in the prolonged stress that we're in, it produces fear and tension, anxiety, and even traumatic stress. And the brain can habituate to various levels of this, which makes it really difficult to pull ourselves out of it, to really kind of halt that stress response. And that's what many of us are in right now. I mean, certainly people who have experienced post-traumatic stress or burnout, they know this experience. They know this kind of overwhelm. And for many of us, this prolonged stress that we're in is producing a similar kind of effect on us.
This sounds very overwhelming. Hopefully, this doesn't lead to a dead end.
Well, fortunately, no, because our thinking brain can help us reframe and reinterpret, difficult situations, frightening situations even. The thinking brain has the potential not only to help us halt the stress, but also give that circuitry a break so we're not continually in that stress and in that tension. And also it can provide kind of a different narrative or a different story about what's occurring, both what's happening to us right now and also what's happened to us in the past. We can actually train ourselves to think and feel and behave differently. And if it's done regularly, this will actually rewire the brain so that we can enjoy a calmer and more focused life. A new narrative or a new story allows us to see an opportunity in life, in big life changes and challenges. We can even harvest some meaning from an experience, a very difficult experience. An interesting thing is that we can't really know or assess our own resilience until we're really in a situation where we're feeling overwhelmed. Because resilience really kind of it kicks in our weakest moments. It's at that most vulnerable point that I'm convinced in that millisecond to continue to carry on.
This aligns with a statement which I've heard before: feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yes, that's a perfect scenario. Is that we are feeling like we're overwhelmed by it and move through it. And for some of us, we really have spent our lives avoiding any kind of challenge or fear or anything that really heightens that sense of reactivity, both in our current lives and in our past lives. It can be a difficult family situation or a job conflict. And yet there are other times when we're in it and somehow we're able to push through. We're able to push through the pain, push through the discomfort. And we find, wow, there are opportunities or possibilities that I had no idea could be available to me. And it's in that split second when we decide to carry on. It's like something overrides the brain's stress response for just that moment, just that millisecond, as I said, to move through that fear-provoking situation. Totally unpredictable at times.
It sounds like it can be very quick and subtle. Is this an accurate statement?
Well, it often is. It's not necessarily a grandiose gesture, but it certainly is life-altering because it's so empowering. We all have a favorite hero who has a history of pushing through or carrying on in spite of some health issue or instability or social injustice, or maybe that somebody is us, when we refuse to let ourselves be stopped or limited by a fear that said to us, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or who do you think you are? What's big about resilience is that it challenges our conditioned thinking. It challenges our conditioned behavior. It says life doesn't have to be the way you thought it was. It can be different. All you have to do is, but it happens so very quickly. We're attached to how we think things should be. And yet it doesn't stop that resilience in motion. People do amazing things in difficult times.
Yeah, Dr. Jane, we discussed the ABCs of thinking and the backstory. We highlighted how powerful they are as the lenses and the frames through which we see ourselves and the world. And since then, we've talked about observing the thinking, and even when it's uncomfortable.
That's right. That's right. Because we want to see the thinking patterns clearly. We want to become familiar with the triggers of our reactivity. What sets me off? What fuels the reactivity? How do I keep the energy activated and energized? Which means I have to also turn and ask myself, so what are my beliefs? What are the beliefs behind this that support this? The conditioning, the justifications, the excuses, of which we have many, and that keeps us doing things the same old. So we've dedicated a lot of our conversations to identifying these personal processes. What's going on with me that keeps me doing the things that I'm doing, the things that I like about myself, the things that are really, not working for me.
Yes, we have. And we've been using the present moment awareness to connect with all of this information. Dr. Jane, so what's next?
Well, so one of the important pieces to know is that, and we mentioned it before, is the brain has the capacity to change and to actually rewire. And this is called neuroplasticity. And when I was first learning about brain functioning years ago, it was believed that the brain was fixed. It was believed that there were, by the time we reached an adult, in our adulthood, we were hardwired. And the brain was only going to have a certain capacity to do what it needed to do. It was dictated by our genes. And the field of neuroscience has grown leaps and bounds since then. So this term neuroplasticity means that the brain is more pliable, more malleable. It's more like plastic. It has the capacity to change. So we can retrain and rewire the neural pathways of the brain. In fact, the brain is changing all the time. New cells are being born, all the time throughout the day. You don't have the same brain when you go to bed at night as the brain that you woke up with. This is called neurogenesis. So our genes provide a certain potential for us, but it doesn't necessarily dictate our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior. So while resistance is believed to be an inherent quality, kind of a reflexive way of facing and understanding the world, and it comes from deep inside us, there are certain skills that can be learned. There are certain things that we can train ourselves to do that would support a more resilient life.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, even if we have a history of negative thoughts, feelings, and behavior, there's always the possibility to embrace change.
That's right. That's right. There's a body of research that has actually followed people who've demonstrated resilient behavior. And this information is available to us about how they perceive themselves and, and how they perceive the world. And it also compares how people who have a more negative take, how that affects their resilience. And the information, along with the current neuroscience and awareness training, really allows us to know pretty much what we can do and what's possible in retraining the brain so it is more resilient, so that we can really kind of hone skills that support resilience. Some of the early work of this came out with a fellow from University of Pennsylvania. His name is Martin Seligman. And he opened up a whole new chapter in psychology. It's called positive psychology. And initially his work looked at the effects of positive and negative thinking, pessimism versus optimism. And from his work, we really began to understand about the effects of these kinds of mindsets, and how they affect us. It comes as no surprise that people who are pessimists probably have more health issues. We know that negative thinking and pessimism really suppresses the immune system. So there's this whole piece around our attitudes, compromising, physical, mental, emotional health. And what's so important to understand is that the ongoing reactions that we have, even to kind of neutral situations, so particularly negative reactions, really causes an ongoing kind of a negative neural reactivity within the system, within our entire system, starting with the brain, but also in the body, which keeps the mind body in a stress mode. And I sometimes think of the character Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh stories, who was always negative. But clearly, it's about this misdirected kind of looping of the negativity that feeds on itself and really causes this continuation of negativity or pessimism.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that type of personality. And yes, it can be difficult to be around.
Yes. And then on the other hand, we have the optimists, and these are the glasses half full people. They look past the current negative situation to the possibilities, to the opportunities. They don't engage in the self-limiting thought patterns. They really look to find new ways of doing things. And I think about the song Tomorrow from the Broadway show Annie. The sun will come out tomorrow. I'm looking past what's happening right now. I'm looking past the challenge or the difficulty or the fear that's on me at this moment. So the findings from Dr. Seligman and his colleagues, discovered that we really can teach people how to change. We can teach people to really shift out of negative patterns. We can slow down thinking patterns. We can slow down the process by challenging our thoughts and challenging our behaviors. And his methodology has really come into play to shift people to really think more positively about themselves and think more positively about the world in general. And we identified some of this when we talked about the backstory and we talked about the ABCs of thinking, and the thoughts and the beliefs that drive this kind of interpretation of the world. So one of the things that Dr. Seligman's colleagues, talk about is that, it's about asking ourselves the questions like, how are these thought patterns affecting me? How are they impacting me? I want to challenge these patterns. So I want to ask myself, are there alternatives? Is there another way of looking at this? What's the worst case scenario here? To really begin to dispute this conditioned habitual experience of how I think about myself and how I think about the world. We want those negative thoughts to become more transparent. We want to challenge the negative concepts and really understand, as we said before, Anna, they're not facts. They're mental events. It's an interpretation that can be reinterpreted. But it's important to remember that we need to get distance from the patterns in order to do this kind of work. We need to be off the train that runs 24/7. We need to be back from the tracks. I need to be able to observe it, kind of out of the eye of the storm. And this is why we go to our breath. This is why we go to the sensations of the body, to slow down that reactivity so that we can face into the adversity of the challenge, that we can continue to slow down the process and reinterpret what's happening, make new choices, look for and choose new behaviors, new interpretations, of our original story. It doesn't have to be the way it's always been.
Well, interpret the reactivity, reinterpret the story. Dr. Jane, can you get into a little more detail about that?
Well, yes, let's take an example. So say, for instance, I do something that I regret. I wish that I hadn't done it, and I'm moving into reactivity because my primitive brain is triggered and it feels like danger because my self-esteem is being impacted, my self-confidence is being impacted, and my self-image. It's all in jeopardy. So this kind of reactivity, this is fight or flight, is going to pretty much hijack that more primitive brain of mine, the cerebral cortex, right? Because I feel like I'm in danger. And this is something that all of us can probably identify. What's happening behind the scenes is my amygdala, that alarm system, and hippocampus, which also has to do with memories, are kind of teaming up. And I'm going to be in full-blown fear and anxiety, around this regret. I'm not only dealing with the feelings of the current situation, but thanks to my helpful hippocampus, I've also opened up Pandora's box, and I have memories and negative, embarrassing things from the past that are kind of like this coming up from my history, overwhelming me. So I'm no longer, or I should say, the longer I'm in this state, the more it's going to loop around and it's going to continue to deepen my negativity and deepen my reactivities. And sometimes this can actually cause us to kind of get in this level of funk where it's called a negative bias, where I see everything negatively. This is that Eeyore kind of part of myself that can show up, and everything seems impossible. And I feel trapped in my own negative state, which is demoralizing. And it's also extremely exhausting.
Yeah, how does one get out of this vortex of negativity?
Well, the key is how quickly we can recover has everything to do with how I can, or what I can recognize, or how I recognize the state that I'm in as it's building up. Okay, but certainly it helps before I bottom out in it. We can't change our history, but we can change how we think about it. So remember, the sooner I recognize the behavior, the sooner I can go to my breath and my body, the sooner I can pull myself back and observe the reactivity rather than be in the reactivity, the better the situation is going to be. So again, this is why we've talked about the awareness. We can at least slow it down, because when I'm in high level reactivity, that's not the time to confront what's happening. I need to have some space from it, and I can sometimes, as I'm in it, I realize that this is not the appropriate time to confront or dispute those thoughts. Maybe it would be better if I would be in my practice of breathing the sensations, or maybe there's another practice that would really slow down the reactivity. Maybe something that would distract me, okay? Give myself time and space so that I can settle and feel more grounded before I decide what I need to do next. Because right action very often can't be really determined in that level of reactivity. I don't want to suppress my thoughts, that's not effective. But sometimes I need to choose where I want to focus and when I want to focus my attention, and these times, or I should say there are times that we really need to process our experience through, other means. A lot of people enjoy journaling, kind of write down my thoughts and feelings, or talking to a trusted friend, or maybe a counselor. Um, Again, it's about having some support to kind of get the clarity on what's happening, not avoiding the stress, but managing the reactivity. Managing the time and the space that I need to do what I need to do to really operate in what I call, right action, doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And this is where we can really extract lessons, things I need to learn, decisions that I need to make regarding what's happening to me, and really kind of do things differently.
Yeah. Can you explain how some individuals can find it easier to manage their stress and access the resilience to bounce back?
Well, Anna, there are certain personality traits that just make it easier um, to have that ability. Things like people who are more positive, they tend to be more buoyant. They have more flexibility versus people, they have more ability to forgive, versus those people who are negative, which tend to be more restricted. People who are angry or jealous on a regular basis or ruminate, a lot of negative thinking, they tend to be more stilted in how they can move in different challenging situations. And we talked that time in one of the last episodes about that negative kind of approach mode. It really kind of narrows our problem solving. So we're not as expansive. There's some people who are just more outgoing and open to new experiences, have more social connections. So some people actually welcome stress and welcome challenges. They gain confidence from learning, from their mishaps and mistakes. I know that sounds, a little strange, but there are people who really kind of say, bring it on. There are also studies that have been done around resilience that say it's more easily and it's more accessible if an individual is really grounded in facing hard reality, can kind of face the tough times, and knows when bad things happen, and can, turn toward that. Also people who know the difference between needs and wants very often tend to be more resilient. People who can be with their suffering and tolerate distress, are also, that's also a trait that makes it, people move more easily through difficult times. Creating meaning for ourselves. People who are always looking for the meaning that they can extract also sometimes have an easier time. People who are able to self-reflect in the same regard, that I'm looking for meaning and I'm looking for how this can be helpful to me. People who feel their connection with humanity, feel their connection with the self-compassion and also the compassion with the world, very often have more flexibility and more resilience. And people who are really grounded in taking right action, doing the next right thing, that this is a value that they carry with them. Also sometimes have an easier time navigating difficult situations. But I also want to say that although these can be personality traits, they are also teachable, learnable skill sets. Not easy, but doable.
So, for those not born with the personality or have strong traits of resilience, they can certainly learn skills that will help navigate difficult or challenging times.
That's exactly right. The key is don't wait till you're in crisis to learn the skills. They're best learned in times that are less stressful because we need to have the thinking brain online to learn them and to be able to access them. Okay? So this really allows us to be prepared for the turbulent times that all of us are going to face sooner or later, and many of us are facing right now in the pandemic. One of my favorite heroes of all times is a fellow by the name of Viktor Frankl. He was a psychologist, he was an author, and he was a survivor of the Nazi concentration camps. And he extracted what he learned about human nature in the treachery of those death camps, and went on to teach the world through systems and theories like logotherapy, taught the world about what he learned in the war afterward, and really, really allowed us to share in that marvelous piece. And he also wrote the book, Man's Search for Meaning. And for me, he epitomizes resilience. And a quote of his that I dearly love, I'd like to share with you, because he says, "We must never forget that we may also find meaning in life, even when confronted with a hopeless situation. When facing a fate that cannot be changed, for that matter, it's to bear witness to the uniquely human potential at its best, which is to transform a personal tragedy into a human achievement. When we no longer are able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves."
Dr. Dane, that's really a powerful quote. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. This leads perfectly into our energy technique video that will be posted this week that supports our conversation today.
That's right, Anna, yes. The energy techniques can be very supportive in helping us maintain the balance while we investigate and challenge, conditioned behavior and conditioned thinking. And what we've included is the Wayne Cook video that we did, which is invaluable for calming scattered thinking that often accompanies reactivity. Very often we're just kind of going in all directions and we can't get ourselves focused and centered. And in that video, we include 2 versions of energy techniques that really help to calm and to focus. And it's going to be interesting as people watch this to discover which one works best for them. So this will be an interesting piece. And I encourage people to get back to us to let us know, what works best.
Yeah, this technique works so well. And I hope our viewers will give it a try. I'm really looking forward to our next conversation when we will be discussing self-esteem and self-confidence.
Yes, we will. We're going to be moving into the more personal interpretation of the self, ourselves. Who am I? How do I feel about myself? How do I feel about myself in the world? Also, what sabotages me? What sabotages my best efforts to be my best and highest self? What gets in the way? I look forward to it.
A lot of important things to discuss. I can't wait.
Yes.
See you next time, Dr. Jane.
I am.